maybe being an attorney prepared me for for a thick skin and ability to hear the word no a lot and not be dissuaded.
Yeah, that is a skill set too.
Price tag's still on there.
Oh my God.
And the name brand of the shirt.
Okay, on today's episode, I'm excited to be joined by Markos Scheer. Markos is the founder and chief executive officer of Premium Aquatics LLC, DBA Seagrove, one of Alaska's leading vertically integrated mariculture companies focused on sustainable oyster and kelp farming. A lifelong advocate for economic development in coastal Alaska, Scheer spent nearly 15 years helping advance the Alaska mariculture industry through business development, policy leadership, and regional collaboration. Markos, welcome to Fish Factor. How are we doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We met at the National Restaurant Association show recently, and I was trying to, meet as many people in the industry as I could. And you were one of the people I talked to. Some delicious oysters.
Well, I'm glad you got a chance to try our Alaska Gem oysters. We feel pretty proud of them, and it was fun to. We must have chucked 1,000 or more oysters in Chicago, wow. and universally everybody thought two things. One, I didn't know Alaska had oysters, and two, these are great.
I didn't know that either. Well, that's a great segue. So I wanted to hear a bit about your origin story because it's not all seafood related. I mean, we went to the same university in Southern California, and then I think if I'm correct on some of my homework, I think you were also practicing law at some point for quite a while too, right?
Yeah. Well, so I started, in the 80s, I started, I left home when I was 15 and got emancipated, and I needed a job because I realized quickly that if you want to eat, you got to work. So I got a job with a seafood company in Ketchikan, working in the freezer section when I was 16, and I ended up working there in different roles for about 13 years. Well, I went to, when I graduated from Ketchikan High School, I got into University of Southern California, and I decided, what better for some kid from the sticks of Alaska to do? Go to USC, where everything is not familiar, and so I ended up in at USC, and I came back after that, and I spent about 6 years with that company in management and operations. And I said, well, it's time to, if I'm going to get a graduate degree, it's time to go. So of the various paths, I decided that getting a law degree would be the one that made the most sense. So I ended up going to law school, and then I ended up practicing law in the seafood industry for about 20 years, before I took a hard left turn.
So, tell me a little bit about that. What is seafood? What does practicing law in the seafood industry look like? I can only think of HR problems that we've had in law.
My focus was less on HR and some of those internal things, and more on company to company type deals. So I did a lot of regulatory work. I actually did a lot of regulatory work in the California Dungeness crab fishery. If we talk about, many of those vessels have multiple permits in multiple states, and there are stand down provisions and things like that have to be interpreted every year as part of the, your ability to move from one state to the next. You start in District 10 and you move north. And then I did a fair amount of work on vessel acquisition, and even in California, you have capacity restrictions on their permits, right? And you could combine permits, but then you can only do that once, and you can only take a percentage of the capacity of the combined boats. And so I did a fair amount of work in that. But really, I was involved in commercial fisheries from California to the Bering Sea, crab, halibut, rationalization, AFA. I represented parties in front of the North Pacific and the Pacific Fishery Management Council. A lot of deals where people are buying and selling boats and permits, and quota and things like that. So I spent a lot of time. I would say that was the predominant role. So I represented seafood companies doing stuff, right? If they were growing or shrinking, and so that's really the role.
What are you able to talk about any of the cases or any companies you represented, or is that not allowed?
Well, I mean, some of it I suppose I could talk about, but it's really, it's, I guess the issues are more interesting than the participants.
Yeah.
So the issues I'd be happy to talk about.
Yeah. What was like? Tell us one of the ones that was like, oh my God, how did this happen? And or maybe it's like one of the big wins that you thought against all odds you were able to pull off.
Well, one of them. I was involved in the groundfish rationalization on the West Coast, where as you recall, it used to be an open access fishery, and then they did a control date, and then they did a rationalization where groundfish was allocated by quotas, and I was involved in that. I was part of a group that successfully contested one of the as the Pacific Management Council is under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, and they have rules and requirements where they are required to do and maintain certain standards. Best science, the national standards have to be maintained through that process, and if they don't, then the action can be considered, or the amendment to the fishery management plan or some component of it can be considered arbitrary and capricious and has to be redone. And typically those are, when those are contested, after the final agency action, you contest it to the federal district court. And typically the agency gets a preference and they usually win. Well, our group took an issue from the groundfish rationalization plan and took it up on to the district court and prevailed, and had to be remanded to the council and to the Department of Commerce for revision, which they did, and but that was that was a particularly rewarding. I was actually involved in a really interesting case once where I had a client, and I was part of a group, that they bought a MiG and from the Ukraine, and it got impounded, and we got it released, and use some kind of arcane admiralty law about deviation to help influence that result, and that was kind of cool.
Wow, that's okay. That's the first time I've heard a story like that.
Yeah.
So let's transition a little bit into the seafood part. So I got you have a extensive background working in seafood since you were young. Worked in the law, combined the two, which is pretty incredible because not everybody's able to do something like that in my experience. Tell me, so the people watching know, like, what's so we use the distinction of mariculture. What does that mean?
So mariculture is what we use in Alaska for marine aquaculture. And the reason that we use mariculture is because there has long been an opposition to finfish farming in Alaska.
Oh.
And it is illegal to farm anything with a fin. So when we started the Alaska Mariculture Initiative in 2013, I think it was, that's through the Alaska Fishery Development Foundation, which I've been on the board there since 2007 and currently the president. And a little background on AFDF. AFDF is one of the fishery development nonprofits that was created associated with each of the fishery management councils that were created under the Magnuson-Stevens Act in 76, I think it was. And it's the only one continuing to operate, but there was one, and I think there are 8 councils, and there was 8 of these. So, and it's an industry group, a nonprofit, to kind of drive initiatives that to try to whether it be full utilization or ways to one of the early projects of AFDF was the Alaska groundfish fishery was dominated by Norwegian and Japanese interests, and they were and then as part of the way to try to domesticate that industry. They did a number of regulatory things like the Anti-Reflagging Act in '88 and things like that. But one of the things is that surimi industry that was the driver of that was primarily a Japanese industry, and that industry had said, we're convinced that Americans could never make surimi in the same way that the Japanese made it. So there was an allocation through then Senator Stevens got passed to go to AFDF to trial domestic surimi production, and they bought equipment, put it into Kodiak, and demonstrated that we could in fact make domestic surimi quality, and that was the precursor to now the entire the EEZ was extended, and then and now all of that groundfish fishery has to be owned by vessels that are U.S. flagged. They've got to have U.S. ownership, and they got to be manned by U.S. citizens, and so that was that changed the nature of the Alaska seafood industry for the last 50 years.
Wow. So what, I guess when, I'm thinking about this, being an entrepreneur business owner that's worked for companies in the past and then worked for my own, then worked for my family and all over the place, I'm always back and forth over, do I like having my own business or would I like the security of working for somebody else? What made you think to start the business like Seagrove? Like, how was that? What made you think that was a good idea? That way?
That's a question sometimes I ask myself every day. I was a partner at a fair-sized law firm, and I could have easily just continued down that path for the next 20 years and retired fat and happy, and or at least fat anyway. But really it was this, through the Alaska Mariculture Initiative and we had been promoting diversification of the seafood industry into mariculture, and as a way of, and the basis was that we looked around Alaska and we're like, there isn't a new biomass. The focus for the last 20 years at that point had been full utilization. How do we do more with what we have? Efficiency, new products, everything from PBO fillets to cut from fresh fillets, and a lot of technology advanced out of there to try to create more value and better products out of the biomass that was available, because there wasn't any new biomass available. So, and we looked at mariculture as a way to diversify that industry and find new opportunities to, and one of the things that I really liked about mariculture, and it's one of the driving reasons why I wanted to do this, is, it's intensely local, right? You have to live there on coastal Alaska to engage in whatever it is, whatever you're growing, whether it be oysters, seaweeds, or scallops, or whatever it is that you're cultivating. You have to be there to do it, right?
Why is that? Is that because it's just isolated and hard to get to, or
no? That's just the nature of agrarian activity. This is water-based agrarian activity. Every farm, the people have to live on the farm and they support it. It takes, you've got to manage it year round. You've got to work on it. You got to till it. All of those things. The other thing that really attracted me in diversification, Alaska is so unique in, it's got 35,000 miles of coastline. It's got 5,000 registered commercial fishing vessels in Alaska. There are 250, at the time we started this, there were 250 permitted seafood processing facilities in the state, and of all sizes, right? Small and large, and there are tens of thousands of people that know how to work on the water. So you have all of these really essential tools, right? These are things that, any industry, if you want to start a new industry, would love to have all this infrastructure and people and knowledge and skill. And you've got 35,000 miles of coastline, which is, only a fraction of which needs to be utilized to create this amazing industry. So, and then the other thing about this that really appealed to me is so much of Alaska's history since colonialization. When the Russians came over and all of, and then the Spaniards and the British and all of people started populating into Alaska, has been extraction-based extraction-based natural resource economy, right? Whether it be oil or gas or furs or whatever it is, right? You take all this wonderful, and you take it out of Alaska and you create value somewhere else. And then when it runs out and they just walk away, right? Well, and this is a paradigm shift in that model, because this means we can build something that doesn't extract from the local resources. We can create local economic activity in these remote communities that really need this kind of thing that they know how to do. And how do we develop that? And the reason I had said is I looked at all these factors and I'd been cheerleading it on the policy side. How do we do this? How do we build this industry and all of this? I'm like, well, I have a fairly unique set of skills and experience in both operations and seafood and and connections in the industry where hopefully I can raise capital and all of that. And I said, well, maybe I need to get off the sideline and, be the change I want to see. And so 10 years ago, I started this company and put my pitch deck and my business plan I put together and went out on the streets and knocked on hundreds of doors to try to find people willing to join on this adventure with me.
That's fantastic. So I'm curious, as our business is evolving, we're in the market for investors and looking for capital. What did you see as your biggest obstacle? Did people understand what you were trying to do? Was it like foreign to them? Like, how did you have to pitch it in a way that they can connect it to something they cared about and was worth investing?
Well, one is you have to find the right kind of investors that have a long, patient view. So the ones that participated are more, tend to be folks that do business in Alaska already. Many people looked at this as it's a total unknown, right? Nobody has done what we're trying to do in Alaska before, and so there's, well, I'll wait till somebody else breaks the ground and then I'll come in is the most common response. Yeah, I get it. They want a faster return, but this is about building a sector, not just something to turn around and create profit. Everybody invested with the expectation of getting some money, but at the same time, you got to build it from scratch, right? Everything we built in the last 6 years has been from raw water. And the first site lease I applied for at the time was the largest site lease by a factor of 5 that the state had ever even considered. And, I remember the conversation with the DNR when I said, well, I look at these regulations and I don't see a specific size limitation on this. Am I reading this wrong? And it took them a couple of weeks to come back. And they said, well, there are some restrictions, on this, and it can't encompass more than so much of a bay or something like that. But generally that was true. Two, the infrastructure didn't exist to do this kind of scale. Oyster farming has been going on in Alaska for 100 years.
Really?
But it's small scale stuff, right? And usually sold locally, not much of an export market. Export meaning out of the state into the lower 48. Last year we were, 2024, we were a small part of that. 25, we shipped 35% of Alaska's total production, and most of it out of state. And this year, I'm sure we'll do more than half.
What's the population like? And are you near Ketchikan or are you in a different area?
Yeah, our plant, we have 3 operations. We have a farm on the west side of Prince of Wales, which is 127 acres, seaweed and shellfish farm. Okay. And that's our primary farm. And Prince of Wales is a large island. It's about 2,500 square miles, about roughly the size of the state of Delaware, big island. And Ketchikan is on a different island, and that's where our processing and shipping facility is. And then north of Ketchikan, we have another farm and a small tour operation, which is where we have an eco tour. We bring guests out to the farm. We teach them about farming shellfish and seaweed in Alaska. We have a floating oyster bar, and they can have oysters and champagne and beer, and it's a really cool experience. Very, very real. Ketchikan's Ketchikan's a big cruise ship port. We get
Yeah,
about
I was gonna say I went there as a stop with my parents when I think on my 16th birthday,
yeah, I think
1986.
yeah. It's grown a lot since then. I mean, they've got 5 cruise ship docks in town now. There'll be almost 2 million cruise ship passengers will go through Ketchikan this year.
Yeah, I just remember a beautiful area in Juneau and some of the places we stopped at, and I've been meaning to go back, but 40 years later, I still haven't. So now I got to put it on my
Well,
list.
you got to put it on your list and come see us.
Yeah. Okay, so it's so admirable, knowing. I mean, I guess knowing the seafood industry, but just knowing how people work in general when it comes to business ventures, or just this is just how we do it sort of attitude. It's so challenging to introduce a new way of thinking and acting and really anything, but specifically business because money's on the line. I mean, like for us to do this on the media side, I think there's a lot of people that look at us like, why are you bothering with this, the social media? Well, here's a great example. You had the pandemic, and if you're a restaurant and you didn't switch over to some kind of online social media presence with third party, you vanished. And I watched a lot of businesses that I grew up eating their food in town that I really wanted to get something from them. But I think they all thought, well, this will just last a couple weeks. And they didn't pivot, they didn't change, and they went away. So you can see the consequence, too, of not embracing technology and of not sharing your vision and story. And the other thing I've learned is anytime you have a vision or story for something that people don't understand, if you don't speak it every day, all the time, it disappears and people get lost. So did you find yourself in a similar situation, being that you're doing something in Alaska that had never been done before?
Well, I think the outreach side of mariculture broadly in the state is really important because it wasn't really a known quantity. We've been benefited in part, as kind of the rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
Through a cluster, a coalition of stakeholders in Alaska, and led by Southeast Conference, which is a Southeast Alaska economic development organization, which and I've also been on the board there for about 10 years. We were successful in applying for a catalyst grant from the EDA, which was a $49 million package, which had 7 different projects within it. And one of those was a marketing and public outreach component to allow both intrastate and interstate promotion to for the mariculture sector, which is something that hadn't really been focused on before. And so we've spent the last 4 years trying to raise the profile of mariculture. And I can tell you that in 10 years ago, if you said mariculture in the Alaska legislature, they'd think you were speaking a foreign language.
That's good.
And now it is top of mind. I mean, Governor Dinleavy said, I want Alaska to be the mariculture capital of the world. We've got, just about everybody knows what it is. There's something going on in their region that, that is, whether seaweed or shellfish or something that is engaging. Their cooperative's been forming. There are new farm sites been activated. There's new capacity. So in that regard, the public, the public facing discussion of that is really important. And we've embraced it too. We have some social media presence. I would say that it's part of what we do and part of what we're trying to create. I suppose we could always do more, but the challenge is, where do you, when you're trying to build everything at the same time, where do you focus your energies and your capital?
Yeah. Well, how many conversations did you have with people about what you wanted to do, what you're planning to do here with Seagrove, where they just didn't get it, or was it an easy sell?
No, it was. It took me 2 years to close the first equity capital round, which was 25% of what I was looking for, and my NDA file was an inch thick of people that I talked to that said, thank you, but no thank you, and and it was, maybe being an attorney prepared me for for a thick skin and ability to hear the word no a lot and not be dissuaded.
Yeah, I mean, that is a skill set too, because I think that's why, you hear all the time that businesses don't make it past the first whatever. I think some businesses don't even get to the opening point because they're so, people are so surrounded by people that don't understand it. That's a bad idea. Why are you bothering it? Because most people are risk averse, and to be an entrepreneur, you've got to have intestinal fortitude and be willing to take those no's all day long. So what?
One of my favorite scenes is from Ted Lasso. When he's talking about what animal has the shortest memory on Earth, and it's the goldfish, right? You got to have a short memory because as an entrepreneur, something's going to happen. I mean, shit just happens. I mean, we've had fires and pestilence and breakdowns and I mean, just stuff, right? And you can't possibly predict all of the horrible things that are going to happen, and you just got to have a short memory and just keep, like you got to be like Dory. You just got to keep on swimming.
You got to be a goldfish.
Be a goldfish. Yeah, that's a fact.
That's there's a coaching program we use, and Ted Lasso is at the center of it as a homework assignment. And be a goldfish is one of the things we talk about a lot. So you get over stuff. There it is. Nice.
There it is, right there.
I have. Wait a second. I think I got something for you over here. Look at this. I got my Ted Lasso ornament. Christmas ornament right here.
I love it. I love it. I grew the mustache a couple of years ago. Actually, the year we put in the oyster farm, because we closed the capital round on January 23rd, and I engineered, designed, acquired, installed, and built and installed the Doyle Bay Oyster Farm with the oyster grow equipment. I was putting seed in the farm on June 23rd.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is my next question, and we can kind of wrap it up here too.
By the way, it's stupid. It was. I hope I never have to do that again.
So we talked about. I got this. Here's all my background. I've got this idea. It takes me 2 years to get capital. Now you're launched. I mean, I tasted the oysters. They're delicious when we met in Chicago at the restaurant show. Where are you now? Like, how are things going? Are you satisfied with where you are? What's your plans for the future?
I'm happy with the trajectory, and we have, when I think about, from 24 to 25, our sales increased 8x. And from 20, so far to date, 26 over 25, we're more than double the pace we were last year. Oh, and so the trajectory is pretty remarkable, frankly. And but I would say that we did a major capital project in 5 of the last 6 years, and this is a proof year. Right, we're not doing major construction. We're gonna, this is a proof of concept here. Really get everything up online, get those markets on step. We're now in about 15 states. I would like to be in 25 or 30 by the end of the year. We've got, so things are going in the right direction. Obviously we're not a startup anymore. We are, nor are we pre-revenue. I would say we're in that early stage space of this. We've got major, we've made a lot of progress, but still have a long way to go. I think as an industry and as a company, every industry in a place, there's a critical mass that needs to be reached. And that critical mass is there's enough production and revenue and people in the system that it becomes sustainable. Right? And if it's built too heavily in any category, kind of like a three-legged stool, right? It's going to tip over. So, it's got to be all the way from production into a market, and there's got to be value, there's got to be quality, there's got to be, there's these parts of mariculture or shellfish that are not profit centers, things like seed production. And marketing is a challenge because, there's not always a direct return on your ROI on marketing can be kind of, amorphous, right?
Yeah,
You know,
it's a
this,
tough one.
like the NRA show, it's a big investment to go. When do you really start seeing returns on that? Well, I think the jury's still out on whether or not there's that, that for us that would add the kind of value that we want for that kind of investment. But
Yeah.
so we're making progress, but we're not where I want to be. And I also don't think the company is quite as diverse and scaled as it needs to be to kind of really hit that sustainable um, you know um, sustainable measure where you can afford the overhead to be really efficient. I've really focused on trying to build that in a way that's efficient, right? We adapting systems designed and proven outside of Alaska to Alaska. The grow out system is Oyster Grow from New Brunswick.
Yeah.
The our processing line is from SED in Australia. Our wet storage system is from France, and we adapted Blue Trace technology for our tagging and record keeping and traceability. So and we use Ocean Farmer, which is an Australian software, to manage inventory and workflow. So each piece of this is designed to, how do we improve on the legacy model and do things just a little bit better and
Yeah.
because we're farther from the marketplace and it costs more to do what we do.
Yeah, using technology to lower your costs and have a competitive advantage and grow. So if you're, I guess the last question I would ask is, how do people learn more about your product and how could they get it into either their stores or restaurants? I assume you're primarily focused on distributing to the restaurants as an end user, correct?
Well, I think restaurants are primary. We started doing some retail this year, and but restaurants are really the kind of bread and butter. So our sales are primarily to regional distributors that
Okay.
will take that product and deliver it to the restaurant. It's pretty hard for a restaurant to buy directly from us because lots are small. The cost per unit for air freight is really high, and
Yeah.
they're not set up. Most restaurants aren't set up to go to the airport and pick up a box of oysters, right?
No.
So the price point's a little lower, but you got this ability to ship a larger lot to a regional distributor, and then along with their other seafood distribution, they include oysters, right? And so it's a model that works pretty well. So the distribution component is really essential part of that. We have some direct relationships, but they're pretty rare.
Well, I know you and I had talked about. I know we buy a lot of our shellfish through DeCarlo Seafood, but I don't know. Like if there's up and down the California coast, all over the place. There's so many different seafood restaurants. How would they find your brand? Would it be through like a Cisco, U.S. Foods?
Well, we're not with any of the majors, not Cisco,
Okay.
yes, but we're looking to. We actually don't have a regular distribution in Southern California. That's something that we're working on. And would like to get engaged in. And we've got some really serious conversations going on with one material distributor in Southern California, which would really kind of cover that Southwest. We're distributing through distributors in Washington, Oregon, Northern Cal, Chicago, Minnesota.
If you're a restaurant watching this right now, who could they call in those areas?
What I would call it, well, if
Or
you're
they call you directly?
Yeah, they could call me directly and I can direct them to it, and they can find that information on SeagroveAlaska.com.
Okay.
In particular regions, or they can go to their distributor and say, "I want this product," and call this number, and we're happy to ship them directly. I mean, that's a lot of our marketing is to restaurants to be able to say, "Hey guys, if you want this product, it's a great product, it's got a great story, it'll move on your menu because people love Alaska has value, as a brand value, and it moves product. It creates velocity on your menu." So go to your distributor and say, "Call these guys, and I'll ship you a box next week."
Awesome. So what's your website for them to find you?
www.seagrovealaska.com.
Great. And everybody loves Alaska seafood, so it should be an easy find.
Yeah, and all the information is on there. You can reach my contact information, and I'm easy to find, and and we ship every week, and we also ship year round. One of the things that's unique about Alaska is it doesn't get warm enough in the summer. We don't really get spawny,
Mm.
because the water temperature doesn't get high enough. And in the winter, we don't ice. So, unlike the Northeast where they shut down in the winter, so
Yeah.
we ship year round. We are and we ship weekly out of Ketchikan, and we can get most anywhere in the country within, we have wet storage, so we can get most anywhere in the country within 24 to 36 hours out of the water. Um, uh,
That's incredible. All
yeah.
right. Well, the hope is that having you on, and we'll send you a copy of this, obviously, and you can use it. And we hope we help drum up some business and get the awareness out there that your product exists in the industry, and we'll get you lots of new business and figure
Yeah,
out a
well,
way to get some of them in San Pedro Fish Market next.
yeah, well, let's talk. I'd love to get him in there. I think you folks would find him to be a great oyster and a great experience.
Yes. Well, thanks for being on. It was a pleasure hearing your story and learning some about Alaska and oysters. So thanks
You
again.
bet. All right. Thanks very much. Have a great day.